Morning, everyone. Welcome to another Sunday special, first one of 2023. And today we've got a team of Jay, Adam, and Abby. Helen couldn't make it today, but yeah, this team we maintain the ratio of ladies and men. And it should be as entertaining as always. So, yeah, morning, gents and Abby.
Morning.
Morning, Piotr.
Um, Brilliant. Okay, well, let's start as usual with the Sunday supplements. We weren't here last week when the supplement was in, so we've got two supplements to catch up on.
We have,
But
we have. So last week, I did a piece around alternative investment strategies because numerically, there's quite a few people who I mean, the good thing about property, I suppose, is that there's so many different ways to do it. For example, we would be a good example of that. You know, we would rarely, if ever, tread on each other's toes in terms of what we're looking at. We would rarely be bidding on the same thing at an auction, despite the fact that all of us are heavily involved in auctions. So I thought it was a good time to look at alternatives, purely because the cost of debt is so high at the moment. I've got lots of people in who are working with me in various guises, saying to me, well, how are you doing it at the moment? What are you doing at the moment? How are you making it stack up? And I went into some detail around changing the slicing of the capital stack apart from anything else, and using a lot more vendor finance style approaches, because that's one of the only ways to get things to stack, apart from kicking things squarely between the eyes. And of course, in this sort of environment, I think we're finding a lot that people are kind of saying that they accept that tough times are coming, but they're not really behaving like that. We were talking with a vendor this week about a deal that we'd love to do, but we're not going any further on the price than where we are. We've got to protect ourselves. And my fear is we will, of course, follow that up as we always do. But in 3 to 6 months' time, the offer is actually based around the valuation, and there isn't a valuation as yet. And that valuation in 3 to 6 months' time, I strongly believe, is going to be lower than it would be if we did it today. Now, if we do it today and we get the product and we get everything that we need, I've no issue with the fact that the value is going to fall, because we're going into it to develop it, to improve it, to hold on to it for the long run. But in 3 or 6 months' time, I'm pretty sure I'm going to be less minded to go over and above what the valuation says in order to secure the deal. So I've been quite cautious to couch that offer around, and I love working on a transparent basis with vendors. It's a lovely, fresh way to approach things and do the best we can for them without compromising ourselves, I suppose. And then this week I went on to talk a bit more about advantage, and where you get edge from. So for those who aren't aware, I've had a fairly illustrious sideline, and sometimes has captured my full-time attention as an advantage play gambler over the years. So at a really simple level, that means betting when you've got the edge rather than the house having the edge. You can lose many hours and weeks and years on YouTube and Wikipedia reading about advantage play, if you like. I'm obsessed with it. I love the math side of it. It's the only way I would ever gamble when I've got an edge, to be honest with you. Now, if you think about translating that to property and investment in general, then property, your edge is that it tends to go up over time. Then there are these are the sort of market edges. You know, there's not enough dwellings, whether that be, I mean, arguably too much commercial retail, sure, but not enough residential dwellings. Lots and lots of commercial types of dwellings there aren't enough of, or they're not in the right location. A difficult planning system, dysfunctional, etc., etc. And so the supply is constricted. Then you throw in the fact that people are obsessed with the stuff, and everybody wants to own their own. And there's still plenty of room in the market forces doing some work. But then I make the point that if we all sit back and wait for the market to do it for us, well, we might as well just bang some money in some REITs or similar sort of vehicle if we can't gain our own edges. So our own edge can be around how well we interpret the data. It can be around how good we are with people and what relationships we build and we've got. It can be about seeing something that other people haven't seen. The developers at the very, very top level always say that it's about looking at something in a different way and looking at the risks in a different way as well. You know, that's always been the way that I've looked at things in terms of this is one of the reasons why buying at a sensible price is such a good strategy overall, because if you need to bail out, if you buy, I've heard a real life example I can give you. If you buy a commercial property with Co-op in on a lease for £1 million, and at the end of the lease, Co-op vacate, and there isn't any demand from another retail, convenience store style operation to take that over, that building might be worth as little as £300,000. That's a live example that I've seen in play. So that the level of risk you're taking there is 700k. Now, of course, rent was collected over the years, but I'm sure I've spoke about this many times where people will buy HMOs particularly and pile so much money into them up front on the basis they're going to get £1,000 a month cash flow for the 100 grand they've left behind in that HMO, and they're not really looking at it in the way that I would, where that's 100 months of everything going to plan, which of course it never does. That's 8 years, 4 months. 8 years, 4 months of everything going to plan before you get your money back, and then you'll get into a territory where you're going to actually make some profit. And of course, in reality, year 3, year 4, you get bigger maintenance bills, you get this, you get that, you get the other. So a little bit about how the maths behind, if you bet on a football coupon, then the bookmaker's got an edge if you're just going in betting on what you think will happen, which of course is what most 99% of the population would say that's what betting is all about. But the advantage player disagrees, and they say, well, I want to bet where I've got an edge. And if there are multiple places where I've got an edge, so for example, in the data, in the area, in the people skills, in the financial structure, in all of that, then all those edges will compound to give me a much, much bigger edge. Whereas if I'm just closing my eyes and throwing darts, the edge that's against me will compound the other way. And the difference is quite literally between a house edge of 80% and a player edge of 400% from experience. And that, I think, translates nearly directly into property investment and investment in general, I guess. So that's today's slightly left field. You can tell it's been a week where everybody's just been busy talking about Prince Harry and there hasn't been much else to say, can't you? So what do you guys think about that?
Nice one. Well,
about Prince Harry? No comment. You won't pull me into that one, I'm afraid. Sorry. Yeah, no comprendez-vous inglés on that one, I'm afraid.
Well fielded.
But one second, Baba. Interestingly, one of the things that we found in the last 3 months at least is the way that we're looking at deals has changed, and where we're getting deals has changed as well. How we're negotiating those things has also changed, and it's not specifically around your article this morning, but it may not be about competitive edge, but it is about gaining an advantage, because we're not seeing it as competition. We don't. There's no one to compete against in our space, fortunately or unfortunately. A bit of competition can push you further than you think in some cases. So it's a bit of a no competition. Sorry, I'm bringing things into life that don't need to be there. Anyway, so we're in the middle of a deal at the moment. Yeah, I feel like that when I talk about this deal.
The toughest negotiation of the week, right? Believe me.
I start hearing about this deal and I start crying too. But we're almost at 11th hour in this deal, and I think it's worthwhile not sharing anything about the deal at the moment. because it's the 11th hour. But if I tell you that the majority of the competitive edges that you were talking about in your article, we've had to employ or apply the majority of those just to get to where we are now. And that's it's a real life example. So reading the article, I think I left a gift just going, yeah, baby, yeah, because it's literally that's what we're going through now. And I don't know if it's a sign of the times. Certainly, there's complications seller side, and I think that's sometimes market irrelevant, because in the space that we're in, you're always dealing with seller motivations that are not the norm. For the most part. So it's a bit of that, and it's also just a bit of maybe the market is at force here. So we have to take some real time considering next steps and how we're conversating with people around these things to kind of get the deal moving forward, because deals can just block up in this kind of environment. They really can.
Yeah. That whole piece today has absolutely come from my recent experiences of how we're having to negotiate on things in order to give the vendors what they want. You know, we're already sharp on pricing by definition. Now, the right sorts of vendors understand that anyway and don't expect you to do it for nothing. They understand when they're dealing with a business or a professional. You know, there's a reason why We Buy Any Car buys so many cars every week, month, year, etc., etc. So particularly people with a business background understand that side of things, but then they have tough decisions to make. You know, we've got a vendor this week that we would love to do the deal, but as I say, we can't stretch any further, and the price just isn't there for her. And she's been, we've all been very honest and open throughout the process. There is an element to which she's been benchmarked because somebody made a cash offer last year, then had it surveyed and pulled out, didn't try to negotiate, just pulled out. And they'd shown proof of funds and all the rest of it. But the problem is their expectations are now anchored up here, and now they need to come down quite a lot because there's a significant development amount involved in that. Not going to be easy. Not going to be easy. But as I say, we'll keep following it up, and we'll see where we get to with all of that as time goes on. And there's more and more things like that coming up. We've also, and not just in-house, but with people who are in Boardroom Club, heard of a few fixed rates being pulled this week. It seems like I would almost suggest that the lenders have got back together at the beginning of January and gone, right, there's too many things hanging at too good a rate. We can get the money out the door at a higher rate, and we don't care too much about who we shaft in order to do it. I've seen too much of a pattern this last 7 days to think that it's anything other than, and it's not in the bond markets, it's not in the swap markets. You know, they're much calmer than they have been. It's not news from inflation across the pond. It's not something going on in Japan or Germany or Italy or the US or anywhere like that. It looks a bit like sharp practice to me. And I think there's a real interesting spread of where the workload is, because we've got a couple of lenders we're dealing with who are still working on a 2-month SLA. I don't think you should be able to call it an SLA if it's 2 months, to be honest, because the word service, the words level, and the words agreement are all not applicable to something taking 2 months. We had one that was on the 24th of October. We were told it would be reviewed within the next 2 months. So I sent an amusing email on Friday, the 23rd of December, saying, as we're 1 day away from the 2 months, I assume this will be being reviewed tomorrow, which of course I know it wouldn't be. And that still hasn't been done. So the 2-month SLA has not been achieved, has not been hit. So there's some pretty ropey stuff going on, but that sort of continues to, when I look at the actions that we took last year and how much money we saved by breaking our mortgages and practicing what I was preaching at the time when banging the drum, you know, it's an awful lot of money, but it's not new money. It's actually still operating to lower margins than we were. It's just a huge cost saving over the next 5 years, which means we don't need to go out and make that money over the next 5 years because we've already got it. But when you're looking at, and I know you guys are the antithesis of of holders of property, but when you look at the big business case for doing it, when by the time, even if you can be bothered with the headspace of the tenants and the leaky taps and all the rest of it, then what you're in the game for is capital growth over time and a bit of cash flow. That's certainly always been my model, as much cash flow as possible, but also Charlie Munger style, Warren Buffett style, stay in the game, timing the market, not timing the market, all the rest of that stuff. Although I timed a lot of sales last year, and I'm glad that I did now, looking at where we are today. Although on that front, there's a huge amount of, I can only describe it as propaganda going on about how bad the market is, when what we're seeing right now we've got a house that went on in a suburb of Birmingham, West Birmingham, and it's gone on at a reasonable price, and it's got 28 viewings. Now, it's not gone on at a quick sale price, it's gone on at a realistic price, and it looks like, 28 viewings, you'd suspect it'll go over the asking, and there'll be some sealed bids. Now, that's happening in the middle of January 2023. So I wrote today about how, there's a real big dichotomy between the investment mortgage rate, which I would suggest is the 5-year fixed limited company rate these days, and the residential mortgage rate, where people have been stress tested at that 5.5% for years, and it's at 4.xx with the right lender. Or most people who haven't got some kind of adverse credit will be able to get 5.5% or lower. So their affordability hasn't been compromised as yet. And at the moment, it doesn't appear like it will be compromised. And that will keep the residential market sort of ticking over as it looks to me like we're going through a relative adjustment, in the same way the stock market in the US adjusted last year. It was up 90% over the course of 3 years. It ended up the year blowing off 18. Of course, everyone talks about the 18 rather than the 90, because once the money's in the bank, nobody wants to give it back, and that's fair enough, I think. But I can see another few percent bubbling off the top, and then things stabilising and moving upwards. Because the one thing I see is wage demands and strikes that could turn into bigger general strikes or other things that have been mooted. The likely path for wages this year in the UK is 5 to 7% up in the private sector. No two ways about it. Good for the employees, but that keeps the prices running hot. Keeps the house prices running, keeps everything running. So let's see.
I think Abby is the right example of like the unions in the UK now. Wanting attention.
We're going to rename a mix
It's difficult keeping a 3-year-old occupied in a room that has none of her toys in it. Look at his nose.
I wouldn't want to negotiate with her, to be honest. I'm not sure I could win that one, that's for sure.
I was going to say, with regards to the rates that are being pulled out, is there anything to do with the fact that in the next 2 weeks there's another committee meeting where the base may move upwards again? Are they just kind of being really very skittish around another 0.5% increase?
Yeah, I don't think there's been any sort of major probabilistic changes in where we thought the path was going. There was a lot of chat after the November meeting that we might be able to stay where we are. And then 1 or 2 of the committee voted to stay where we were. And that didn't happen because the majority voted to carry on pressing on up 0.5. I think there's a couple of bits of economic reality that are just not being discussed at the moment, right? One, they have finally accepted that they haven't done the greatest job over the last 2 or 3 years. I think when I say they, I mean the Bank of England, sorry. They were, I think, good when the pandemic came and steadied the ship, and that's their job. They were good when Truss and Kwarteng did their level best to destroy the economic future of the UK. They did absolutely the right thing there and then. But the reality is they didn't see the inflation coming quickly enough. They didn't understand the global supply chain impact of COVID, which they've in the last week come out and admitted that they didn't understand that properly. And in a way, I can live with that, because ultimately they work on data, and there wasn't the data on a proper pandemic for the last 100 years. So we didn't have, and in 1918, when the Spanish flu came, we didn't have that sort of level of data capture capability. So we were flying blind a little bit. And so, although that makes you a little bit nervy, they didn't know what they were doing. The problem, I think, from there also is that as you carry on, you then worry they don't know what they're doing today, and they're still flying blind as we sort of go further and deeper into this. And there's a big differential at the moment between the US Federal Reserve and the stock market and the bond markets and the markets that predict, the derivative markets that predict where the interest rates are going in the US this year. So that because we have extra visibility in the States, all the members of the FOMC, the committee over there, they plot their best guess, and the admission is it is a best guess. They plot I always have this effect on women when I talk about interest rates and central banking, by the way. It's just the nature of the beast. No, they plot their best guess on this graph, which is one of the most boring looking graphs you can imagine, because it's just a load of dots. It's called the dot plot. And when they are predicting that rates will be 5%, maybe 5.25% at the end of this year, whereas what's going on in the markets is predicting no, the Fed will have had to have dropped the rates by then. But if you go back into the argument we were just talking about, and something else that I alluded to this morning, the central banks are empowered to put rates up more if unemployment is low. Unemployment is not just low, it's ultra low by historical standards at the moment. And more importantly, from a run that started in December 21 in the UK, and I think February or March 22 in the US, of rapid interest rate rises by anyone's historical standards, we are nowhere near that having an impact on the labour market just yet. Now, every economist worth their salt who was going to tell the truth, which is not many of them, let's face it, but I'd like to think I'm in that category, would tell you that if you got a load of people together at the back end of 2021 and said, right, interest rates, base rate by the end of 2022 will be 3.5, 5-year bond yield will be about that sort of level, 3.25 to 3.75. I'd have said, my God, take cover. There's going to be some real problems with the debt there. But in reality, we're not actually seeing that. We're seeing more cash on company balance sheets that have listed companies than we've ever seen. They've got money that they know they're going to need to use to pay down debt as it gets more expensive. But when you think about it, if you are, let's think about a couple of scenarios. Let's say you're a portfolio landlord, you've been in the game for 20 years. So you're sitting on a portfolio, but you've incorporated your portfolio. So you've got the limited company structure, right? Now, let's say you have had in that 20 years about 200% capital growth, right? So you bought these 20 for a sum total of 2 million. They're now worth 6 million. You've done a bit of refinancing over the years and you owe 2 million. You haven't wanted to gear up beyond what you've paid for the properties, right? So 33% loans of value in today's market. So it's not a major headache for you in terms of your mortgage costs are probably coming in at about 1/4 to 1/3 of the rent that's coming in. And you've got all the rest of that free cash flow to pay agents, to pay accountants, to do the maintenance, to do the compliance, to do all those things you need to run the portfolio. And you've got some nice free cash flow from that, a 6-figure sum every year. The tax net is tightening around all of us as we speak if we're unfortunate enough to live in the UK jurisdiction. And so you don't need and don't want to take all of that money out of the company every year and get absolutely slapped for tax on it. You're quite happy drawing down 50k. That's enough for your lifestyle. You've got no mortgage on your own home and all the rest of it. Now, when you've got a hundred plus thousand coming in of free cash flow into a business every year, the natural reaction would be to reinvest it and buy some more, and do some things maybe you wouldn't have done in the past, but you learn as you go on and you see solid investments and you get involved in them. You might gear those at 75%, you might not gear them at all, you might just use the cash. But when you've got mortgages that were 3% that are now 6%, you might say, well, hang on a second, that 6% is not the worst return in the world. And I get to control that 6. So do you know what? Of my £300,000 free cash flow this year from that portfolio, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use 200,000 of it to pay down some of the debt, because I'm not paying 6% when it comes back to remortgaging. I refuse to work for the bank. And there'll be, there's quite a lot of, maybe not quite framed like that. And obviously every example is different, but I've spoken to a few investors who are thinking along those lines. Now, what does that mean? It means they're not supplying those new units into the PRS. If you looked at what we've done specifically, we've generally not competed with owner occupiers for property. We've taken stuff that's derelict. We've taken stuff that needs work. We've taken stuff with incredibly challenging tenants. We've taken all of that stuff, and we've made it good, and we've put people in there who've generally been happy, and willing tenants to go in. If we can't do that, now we stopped doing so much of that in 2021 because the price of all the materials and everything went so crazy, and it was so hard to buy auction. And then we started taking on properties where the tenants had not been looked after by the landlords, or the tenants were specifically difficult for the correct sort of reward to risk ratio, I suppose. But at the moment, it's also harder to do that, because when you're buying something with problems like that at a 6% mortgage, it doesn't stack up. So it stays unbought unless the cash buyers are going to buy, which is, of course, maybe 20% of the investment market, something like that. But then a lot of cash buyers buy on the expectation they're going to get a mortgage at some point down the line. If I give you an example from a cash-rich investment group that I'm involved with at the moment, what they're saying is, we'll carry on buying the really good stuff, the best stuff you can get, but we're not going to refinance it. So at some point, we're going to run out of money this year, probably this quarter, I'd imagine, or certainly next quarter. So the only solution then is send system working, send more money, but we can't refinance because we've not got good offers, or not offers we're willing to pay in terms of the cost of the debt. So all of this, I described it today as sludge, right? This is January sludge, right? We're going more slowly. Things are still taking longer from the lenders who are still very busy from last year's business that came through the door. And I think, to be honest, those lenders are more likely to be people who can't get staff and haven't staffed up accordingly. And that's part of the recruitment crisis and everything else that's been going on. What do you think, Abby? Do you agree with that?
Yeah.
You can never get those headphones back, Jay. That's not happening. Look at it. No chance.
Yay. Yeah, interest
She clearly
rates.
likes what she heard.
Sensible girl.
Yeah.
Nice one. Well, I definitely see, like, from the competition perspective, that like the offers that we're making on the stuff that comes from like cash buying companies, those offers are way more like people considering them. Like sometimes, like I am making silly offers. Like I like work it out and I say that's why we're offering this, and people are like seriously considering it. And like it works because like we get rid of all the risks, but like for people they just need like someone who's gonna perform. And it's the competition is definitely kind of I wouldn't say decimated, but lowered. And that's the kind of like what we see. And
I think we're seeing sort of lower volume with higher margin to protect ourselves, or the same margin if things do go to the sort of bearish case of where the economy and prices could go. But all of that slows us all down, slows the industry down. Which is very much what we predicted last year. Fewer transactions are the ultimate end result of all of those things. And there's 10 reasons for landlords to want to get out at the moment. That would 50 reasons. Chat GPT would find you 5,000 reasons with no problem to get out of UK landlording at the moment. But if you ask for 50 reasons to get in, I think you'd really, really struggle beyond about 3 or 4. So I think once you're in, Safe commented today on my post on Facebook and said, there's almost a moat forming around UK residential property landlording at the moment. And I think that's a really good way of defining. You go back to Jay's comments about competition or lack of competition. Monopolies do very well for a reason. Oligopolies do very well for a reason. So there might be some pain while the market transitions into that, rather than the 1 and 2 property landlords. We transition into the corporate era of housing supply, housing provision. But once we're there, those who are in are going to have some really significant competitive advantages.
Yeah.
But those who never got in are going to find it a lot harder to get in.
I like this positive spin, like between yourself, Safe, and us. Like we kind of have the same attitude. Like we see what's fashionable, and we want to be selling into that market. But at the same time, like we would go where not many people go, because we know the money is there. If things are structured well, and then it's like some holding, and then selling into the right market when the time is right is the way to go, I think, now.
Let me show you this just quickly. I've got a young man sports. Look at this branding.
There we go.
There we go. Look, there we go.
Wow. Oh, wow.
exclusive merchandise only here.
On brand. I like it. You can see Abby is wearing black and white, so that's also on brand.
Absolutely.
And it says Epic on the front, so she's definitely representing.
You need to get one of those inflatable hammers, Jay. One of those big ones. She can smack you on the head like occasionally during the recording. That would be great.
It would be brilliant, but every inflatable we ever gotten her, she's just chewed it to pieces.
Okay, imagine.
Escape. This is the reverse of the doctor with the small child that came on BBC a few years ago, isn't it? Really, she's going out the room rather than coming in.
Yeah. So definitely interesting times with the way the market moves.
What are your overall thoughts, Piotr, in terms of what the direction of both the commercial and the resi market this year in the UK? What do you see happening?
Yeah, I think, like, to be honest, things are still selling. There are people who want to buy things, and there's way more people kind of employing their own capital. Like when we had a chat with some auctioneers, like kind of one of the auctioneers said that people have been waiting for a long time with their cash to employ. Like they know, like now is the time, because they've been sitting on sidelines maybe for some time. Even though like we might not see a massive drop, but they're probably buying things at levels that are much lower than they'll have to be previously at. So those people are getting more active. There are people who have SAS pension. There are people who have like sick pension. Like all that pension people, they want to employ things because those things might not be doing well in the stock market right now.
Well, yeah, and inflation's playing on their mind, of course, as well, because they've sat. And I think what people maybe don't necessarily realise is that when the market is rising like it was, it's all very well, doing the data thing and saying, well, it was up 1.2% in April 2022 or whatever. But in reality, things were getting chased and bid well above what their asking prices were in a lot of situations. So there was extra heat on top of the heat, and people just couldn't participate or couldn't bring themselves to, which is why they've got all that cash that you're talking about. Then when things start to slide a little bit, then prices come back a little bit more than the figures show. So you might have been. I mean, I definitely had some live examples of this last year where we're selling properties that were going at sort of 7 to 10% above what the agent had said. I mean, the most extreme one I can remember is we had it on the books at 120k, as in value, about the value where we thought it should be, maybe 125 to actually achieve in a sale. Agent came round and said 140, and it sold in the first weekend at 147,500. Now, that's only one example, and the most extreme example in the percentage. But we know what we're doing. So for us to be 20% out is not really. And if that house went to market today in the same state that we sold it, I think it goes to market at 125, and it kicks around for a bit and maybe gets between 120 and 130. That's the reality. So that's your 15% drop personified in it. And why you deal with, the worthwhile bit of dealing with the residential market on the way out of deals, although you have to mess around, although you have to put up with quite a bit, is that the buyers are very motivated. So ultimately, if you can deal with motivated sellers and you can deal with motivated buyers, then you've got a pretty good business there. And while the capital growth doesn't look that exciting over the next couple of years, you've got that option to say, well, maybe I should be the one. I mean, personally, I haven't been getting the money in and paying down the debt. I've been getting the money in and hoarding it to do a full Warren Buffett, high gearing, high liquidity, because the debt is deductible in terms of tax purposes, and the tax burden's so high at the moment, and a lot of the debt has been fixed at a nice low level. That's even more incentive to hold on to the money and wait for some things to happen and keep poking. And like you, put some offers in where you'd expect over the last 2 years, I don't think you'd have even put in offers like the offers we've been putting in at the moment. But instead of getting told to run away fast, people are prodding, people are asking, people understand the logic of why you're doing what you're doing. Absolutely.
Yeah. It's and also like people might have different motivations as well, because previously people will have had like financial issues and stuff like that. Right now, maybe they need cash to employ in other deals that are extremely good in the markets that they know really well. Sometimes the sales are purely to liquidate and buy better things somewhere else. Well,
if you've had a bump of 20 to 30% in pricing, and then you have a haircut of 5 or 10, you're still a long way ahead of where you were in 20. There'll be lots of stuff hanging around which people thought, well, I almost got rid of that before the pandemic. I'm glad I didn't now. But do you know what? Rather than sit and speculate on a rocky market, just cash in now. It makes sense. You've got a lot more people thinking, time to do something with the money, regardless of whatever it is, because they've hung on for a couple of years. You've got a lot of different motivations sort of still playing out. And you go back to what you said as well. There's a big, if you think from a corporate perspective, there's all this cash out there on the company balance sheets. But from an individual investor perspective, there's also all that cash out there on the household balance sheet or the personal balance sheet.
And I think let's not forget people like international buyers, because the pound has dropped so much in the 6 months. So I don't know how it is right now, but I know a lot of people have already exchanged money into pounds like 6 months ago, and now they're just waiting to purchase things because for them the discounts are even bigger given the exchange rates. So even if the prices won't go up, their capital will be much safer in their own countries, and
absolutely
more stable given the safety of the exchange rate, the safety of the prices coming down. There's a lot of that.
Well, at the time of height, you're very right. At the time of heightened geopolitical risk, ultimately, then the baseline of the UK, the US, and the difference between that and maybe an Eastern European country on the border of the Ukraine or whatever, it's gone up. It's 10x the difference between the two. So, but that's not the only. That's what we see in Europe. There's geopolitical tensions in Asia and in the Middle East that are as as high as they've been for the last, well, since the Gulf, probably, to be honest. And the unknown bit of what's going to happen with China and Taiwan, apart from anything else, you know.
Yeah, indeed. Definitely definitely interesting times. And I think like the pressures that are from international markets, and not only for their buying kind of for the purchase and sell market, but also for the renting. So I know in London, like one of the major drivers of rents going up massively are the Hong Kong people coming in, and they need to have a 12 months tenancy for them to get the visa. And it's pretty much an automatic process, and they're willing to outbid people massively and pay up front just to get that visa sorted. And it's a massive influence on the rental market prices.
We've had quite a lot of that in Solihull, so I can't imagine what some of the London stories are like. But we've seen stuff bid to 50% over the rental asking price in order to get in, because they want the school, they want the area, they know where they're going to be working. Bang, that's it. That's where they want to be. And they come in. I think the average one comes in. The average Hong Kong household comes in with round about 700k in UK pounds in terms of assets. So not a small number. And they thought they can do stuff. They can swing the bat and in order to make a big move that, from our side of the fence, looks extremely sensible, given what's been happening in recent times in China.
Yeah, that's right. Especially that their 700k might not be theirs at some point, or they might not be able to use it as like the way they
Exactly.
can use it in the UK. So yeah. Jay, any comments? You've been busy today.
Yeah, I get the feeling the moment I start talking, she's going to start yelping again.
I think you've done 10,000 steps today already.
Thank you. Well, that takes the pressure off finding a bit of time to get on the old rowing machine. So it's good to hear. But no, I think it's a really interesting market. We've been asked to write a couple of things for some industry publications, and it's all centered around the same kind of thing. Assuming that there are no more political, economic, war-style events for the next 6 to 9 months, actually, I think the investment market is going to carry on regardless. You know, I made mention of, there are certain things that bolstered the market during COVID and certain things that slowed it down. Stamp duty holiday being one of the biggest things that kind of sped it up, and solicitors being able to keep up with that was one of the things that slowed it down. Land registry slowed a lot of things down. It's one of these things. There's the action, and then there's the reaction. I don't think we've actually seen the real reaction from maybe the events of the last 6 or 7 years yet.
Escape, I totally agree with you. I think there's an awful lot still to play out from everything that was done during COVID. From Brexit even. I still think that got overshadowed by COVID, and a lot of maybe the effect of Brexit is being shadowed by being played out as COVID issues, right? So quite a few people said the effects of Brexit would take longer to play out than the effects of COVID. But I mean, I saw the effects of COVID playing out over 5 to 10 years. So that's quite a stretch. But there was James O'Brien on LBC took some great delight this week in revealing a poll that was saying how the difference between how much other countries other than the UK wanted to leave the EU before the UK left the EU and what they say today, because other countries are looking in, saying Brexit has not been good for the UK. And I mean, most ardent Brexiteers would say they weren't expecting it to be good in the first place. Whether there's too many of them who either say it was worth the price or just keep waiting or whatever it is. But the problem from an economic perspective is always the same. I thought the economic case for leaving was weak, but I understood the political case. But ultimately, I'm an economist, so I was swayed by the economic case. We don't have a lot of growth to play with at a really simple level. We're an economy that was growing post-financial crash at 1.5% to 2%. So if you take 1% off that, you're really scratching around.
Well, I think it's really interesting because you hear quite a bit of noise from the French market where they're trying to keep the right up because the right have made it really very clear that they're not seeing a great deal of benefit in being in the EC. And then you've got Angela Merkel somehow just disappeared into the ether, not heard or seen hide nor hair of her for God knows how long, right? And there's been some similar kind of issues in Germany because obviously they took in she's putting her dolly to sleep. They took in quite a lot of immigrants, Middle Eastern immigrants, and I think there wasn't really much international reporting, but from people that we know there, it hasn't been accepted really very well. And you're looking at France and Germany as obviously previously, as well as the UK, as being three of the main pegs of the European Union as an economic community. And if you're starting to see them having louder voices on the opposing side, then that really does it causes a lot of questions. You're hearing the same thing in Italy as well. Yeah.
Well, this is how, if you go, the political risks that are the stability risks that worry people after things like pandemics are, if indeed there are deepening chasms in wealth inequality and stuff like that, then if we presume this is how it would play out in the UK, and this is a much more stable system than some of the others that are around, if Labour get in and win the next election and then have 5 years and don't make things better for the person on the street, for a combination of the factors that we've talked about above, apart from anything else, then ultimately you've had the Conservatives, you've had Labour. That's when the doors open for the XYZ party. That might be a new thing that starts up, that might be on the hard left or the hard right, that could cause significant problems. And of course, the French have been fencing off Marine Le Pen for some years now, for a couple of presidential cycles. But those people are around and about. And as you mentioned, Jay, Italy have had a regime change with although it's a coalition, there's some salty far right activists involved in that, which usually do things a bit like, Truss was fairly far right in terms of being libertarian, and you saw what the international markets thought of all of that.
I mean, the interesting thing for me is it's far less a left and right issue, and it's far more a popularist, non-popularist politics issue, right? Because what everyone is trying to do is pander, and in that pandering, there's zero progression. In fact, there's regression, because the common person on the street, and I count myself and everyone on this call and everywhere else, a common person on the street, by and large, doesn't have enough information or a big enough part of the picture to be able to make a cogent decision around what policy change should happen. And that's the reality. And I imagine, just based on how different elements of the government, you've got planning and council tax, and they don't talk to each other. So you have to kind of hope that people higher up in government are talking to each other, and the chances of that are probably really very slim. But the reality is that everything is now being driven towards what is the higher demographic and how do we appease them most? Because the game is power, not progression. Who can stay in the longest and take the most whilst they're there? And there's an absolute there's an absolute irrelevance around whether it's conservatism or whether it's libertarianism, it doesn't really matter, because they're different faces, and none of them are showing themselves as being true politicians, because their policies are weak and pandering. The way that they address things is weak and pandering. There's not a single person in government or politics today who can stand in front of somebody and just say, yeah, that was a fuck up. We completely balls that one up. Or I think the last Prime Minister was an absolute arsehole. Completely screwed us all over. And that could have been any of the last 4 in the last 5 years, right? And what the world needs is actually someone who's going to stand up and say, yeah, that may seem nice, but it's not going to work. But none of them have got the balls to say it, or the ovaries, or whatever genitalia you want to ascribe to somebody. They just haven't got it. Because the way they get to where they're getting to is they have to scratch so many backs and bend over so many benches that actually they don't have a decision to make.
No, too many opposing forces to appease, whoever you are. And you've seen that. I think that's spot on, because you've seen that with Sunak, with things that are, if you've observed him over the relatively short time he's been in politics, he's definitely done some things that are not concurrent with his own values, but he's had to keep people. And now that he's facing his first rebellion in terms of the vote that's going through the Commons at the moment, and that will be, with a majority of 80 odd, that's some bad result, realistically. That is. I'm not saying it's the right or wrong thing, but if you can't keep the house in order, it doesn't look good for you if it happens again and again. That's for sure.
Yeah. Brilliant. To
make it not sound too dystopian, everyone have a fantastic Sunday.
No one learned anything there, mate. Politicians are arseholes. We knew that. We're all right.
Yeah, we knew that already. Yeah, to be honest, it was just a cathartic rant. I'll be honest. Yeah. That was a self-serving situation.
A good one.
Nice one. Well, I think we did well discussing all those subjects today, and Abby's contribution's been enormous to the entertainment factor. I think with our star rating for entertainment, I think it will be high up today. Brilliant. Okay, well, thanks everyone for tuning in, making comments, likes, hearts, and all the other reactions. And we'll be back next week, hopefully with Helen. And anything else?
That's all. Okay. Thanks very much, everybody. Thanks for your engagement as always.
Brilliant. Have a good Sunday, guys.